G'day, it's Gus Worland here from Gotcha4Life, and sorry I couldn't get on the chat last night. I tried my best, but technology let us down. But just wanted to let you guys know a little bit about Gotcha4Life. I started it 4 years ago off the back of a TV show called Man Up that I did on the ABC. It's still available if you want to watch it. It's not an easy watch, but it's quite emotional, but it's 3 hours, and I'd say if you've got any male in your life that you love, it might be a good watch for you. I'm just really worried about the suicide rate in this country. It's the #1 way to die if you're an Australian male. Those figures are coming out now through the pandemic, 7 blokes a day, every single day. So we've got to do something different. We've got to learn how to have a conversation of gravity. We've got to learn how to have a conversation that could save not only our lives, but our mates as well. It's time to man up and speak up rather than man up and shut up, which is what we've been told about all our lives. So please, find that one person in your life who has got you for life. That one person that you can have that conversation with, warts and all. No one's going to judge you. They're going to love you no matter what, and they're going to be able to help you and support you through what we're all going through, which is sometimes where it gets pretty dark. So it's time to throw away perfect. It's time to look after each other, put a line in the sand and say no more suicides on my watch. No one that I love, no one in my community is going to worry alone and get to a stage where they make that terrible decision. So that's what Gotcha4Life is all about, and I cannot wait to help in any way. I love the game of cricket so much. I'm literally the cricket tragic, and I want to help in every way I can, whether it's through the association or clubs or whoever wants workshops or for me to come along and present. So look forward to talking to you guys at another time, and sorry again for last night.
Good evening. My name is Mark Cameron. I'm the Coaching and Talent Manager for Country New South Wales. Thanks for being a part of this. I think this is our last coach development webinar for 2020. The year has flown. We've got a really fantastic night this evening. Brett Rankin is speaking with Cricket Australia's sports psychologist, Peter Clarke, about probably the part of cricket that we all agree is the most important, yet rarely understood and probably rarely focused on as coaches is the actual mind game. So I'm actually really looking forward to this. I'm gonna shoot straight to Brett. Brett's our coaching and talent specialist for the Greater Hunter, and Brett's going to introduce Pete. And I'm going to be a really avid watcher. So I hope you enjoy tonight. Over to you, Brett.
Thanks, Mark. Welcome everybody. As Mark alluded to, this is our last webinar for 2020, and I know we've got a number of coaches that have returned for our various webinars, so welcome back. And if there's any new ones on the call, welcome to your first. Hopefully it won't be your last. As Mark said, very exciting for us to have Peter Clarke in the house. Peter is the current Cricket Australia female psychologist, and alongside that, Peter actually works with the Cricket Australia pathway female and male players. But even equally important is that Peter actually coaches the Premier Grade club in Queensland, the University Club, Queensland University, and so has a very strong cricketing flavour to his work. So welcome, Pete. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Brett. I appreciate the introduction. You pumped my tires up.
Okay. So, look, before we jump into leaning in on your knowledge, Peter, I just want to give the audience a bit of a background to how this is going to work tonight. So thanks everyone for registering. During that registration process, we asked you if you could give us 3 pieces of feedback around the stuff that's hurting you in clubland, particularly the above the shoulders type issues that you might be faced. So we had over 100 registrations for this webinar. So we had 300 pieces of feedback. And what we've tried to do is we've tried to compartmentalise those pieces of feedback. And what we've put them into categories, and Pete's going to actually speak to those categories tonight. So the 6 categories that we're going to cover off on, improving player confidence. That's the first one. That was the most popular. Preparing for competition was second most popular. Concentrating and staying focused. Arousal control. goal setting, some mental imagery. So what I'm going to do is actually talk to Peter about those 6 particular elements of above the shoulders type issues, and he's going to set the scene, and then we might just have a chat to him about how we can modify some training environments to hopefully help you as coaches. So Pete, let's jump into it. The first, as I mentioned, the most popular piece of feedback we got was around improving player confidence, and there were some key words in that feedback, words like fear, failure, empower, resilience, and they really dominated that particular theme. So Pete, can you have a talk to us around some frameworks, how coaches might be able to address some of that stuff, and maybe some training environment feedback?
Yeah. Thanks for that, Brett. One thing I'd like to say before we get into it, like Brett's been kind enough to maybe lay out some of my credentials and the opportunities I've had, you know, teams you work with, or maybe a profession. But the first thing I'd like to say is that I don't know everything about psychology or human behavior. Psychology as a science doesn't understand everything about human behavior. And it's not to say there's no preaching of the gospel. I'm not here to tell you, here's how you do things. I'm right, you're wrong. To me, that doesn't exist. It's not a model that's particularly successful. What it is, what's really important we understand is each person's experience, and what your experience is, the knowledge you have of your players, your team, your circumstance. That's going to be more important than anything we're going to say tonight. So please don't take anything I say with a grain of salt, a bucket of salt, however much salt you want with it. All I'm going to do is, what I am going to do is try and provide either some research based or anecdotally based, in my experience, evidence around some frameworks or some things that might answer your questions. But be mindful of anyone who comes to speak. I think this is really important to say up front. All you're doing, like we're spending an hour tonight. There's 168 hours in a week. You know, then there's 52 weeks in a year, and then on and on and on. This is a small little smidgen. So all we can hope to do is plant a seed. But like I always say in this stuff, if you throw a seed on concrete, nothing's going to happen. So my part today is only throwing the seed. All the rest of the stuff happens after today. The work happens after today. And there's a lot of gurus out there calling themselves, you know, whether it be a performance coach, a mental skills coach, doing whatever. Anyone who sells you that you can do something for an hour and make a huge change is telling you lies. It'd be the equivalent of a strength and conditioning coach, like going for one session and putting on 25 kg of muscle. You know, the things that need to happen is there's time and there's hard work that needs to happen in between. So I like to set that stage first. I am no guru. There's no silver bullet. I'll just share some of my experiences and some of the frameworks we know that have balance in the research. So sorry, Brett, I forgot your question completely. I thought that was really important.
So Mark, do you want me to revisit the question? It was about improving player confidence was probably the strongest theme in the feedback, and words like fear, failure, empower, resilience were the predominant words used in that feedback. So how can our coaches set up environments that will improve player confidence, essentially?
Yeah, that's a great question, and again, it's multifaceted. What I would say is the first thing we need to understand is how are we defining confidence, right? And I think that's a tricky one for a lot of people, because what we know with emotions, for example, so we're looking at the difference between what's a trait, you know, maybe trait confidence, or actually what we mean is self-belief, or self-efficacy when we say confidence, because on any given day you may not be feeling confident. Or Mark will tell you, any player will tell you, there's some days where you feel more confident than others. On that particular day, you might be having a few doubts, your body's not feeling great, you're in poor form, and your confidence can waver in that sense. But that's really different to a kind of core self-belief, which is what I think we're getting at when we keep saying confidence, right? So how do we actually improve people's self-belief and self-efficacy? And again, what I challenge us to do is saying, what is our role in that? Because we can't improve someone's confidence. We can't do that. No one can do that for someone else. To your point, we can create an environment. You know, we can nudge the conversations in the right way, try and facilitate things such that we build confidence, but the players are the ones that have to do it. So I would suggest that one of the early things when we're talking about confidence is building the competence through skill, right? So how do we allow people to actually achieve certain levels. Let's say you're doing batting drills and there's a clear progression, and there's a point in time where they achieve something, right? Rather than just runs or wickets, there's a time where they achieve something, take 20 catches, whatever it may be. And through competence, we can start to build confidence by creating evidence, right? We say, okay, hey, mate, you just caught 20 catches in a row. Next time you're wondering, the high ball goes up, that's something you got to lean on. There's an evidence base to say you can catch the ball. Whether it be the ability to play the pull shot and someone's scared of the ball. And, that's a natural emotion. The ball's coming at your head. You're going to move out the way. That's your default kind of reaction. So do we jump in the nets and we're bowling hard many short balls, and we just encourage them to do the behavior, get in line, get under the ball, and over when they do it, again, proving the evidence. This is not rocket science, but proving, hey, mate, you just faced 20 short balls, with a slight arm on concrete coming pretty quick, and you got under them. So what we're doing is we're building the evidence base to demonstrate to a person you can do it. That's the self-belief of being able to do the task. That's something that's really important. So I think that's a really clear, simple, easy step that we can do in coaching to make sure we're building competence and confidence through that. The other piece that I think is extremely important is we can't mislead players to think that you're going to feel confident all the time, and there's something, that's not possible, and that's not what we're trying to achieve. And so when people think that that's possible, then they go, well, other people feel confident all the time. They might watch Ricky Ponting and think like Ricky Ponting is always confident because what they're seeing is behavior, right? They don't know, or they might watch Rafael Nadal in tennis and not know that he's so nervous before he plays sometimes that he throws up, reportedly. So people won't know that because all they see is his behavior. And so what we want to do is educate players that, hey, you won't always feel confident every time you go out to play. That's fine. What's actually more important is that you control your behaviors. So confidence through, people have the concept of the fake it till you make it. I don't necessarily see it as if you're faking it. I look at it as you control what you can. You can't always control your thoughts. You can't always control your emotions. You can always control your behaviors, right? So how about you behave in a manner that is confident? Because you can always control that, right? And what you can also do along with that is build a process in of what you're thinking when you're doing certain behaviors. So it's an important distinction to make, to tell people, hey, and even for ourselves, we're trying to increase confidence, yes, but what we mean is self-belief and self-efficacy. But the emotion of feeling, I feel confident today, letting people know that'll come and go. What's more important, rather than chasing that feeling all the time, what's more important is that you know the behaviors that you're going to do on any given day. And that comes with your routines. Does that answer kind of the beginning of your question there?
Pete, that's great, because it actually, I think you mentioned building up competence leading to confidence. And that's interesting because the next question that I've actually got for you is that polled really strongly in our feedback was preparing for competition. And some of the key words in preparing for competition were train with purpose, review performance, game day planning, teamwork together. So that was some pretty strong themes, particularly around developing competence. Training with purpose is really important. So could you elaborate on, so the theme is preparing for competition. Can you, again, elaborate on some of the stuff that our coaches can employ in their environments to assist that process?
Yeah, it's a great question. And some of the things you were saying there, like reviewing, training with purpose. As I said, the coaches know what they're doing and understand the game. Those are really good things to be thinking about. I think something that's really important and a bit bigger picture is what we're really trying to achieve from any kind of, what we're searching for is performance consistency, right? So any person can play well. If you've played well once, it means you've got the ability to play well, right? That's just a fact. You can play well because you did it one time. What we're searching for is performance consistency. How do I perform well more often, or have the gap between my best and worst performance be a bit smaller? How do we close that gap? And in order to do that, something that's really important not just from a mental perspective, but also from a physical and a tactical perspective is self-awareness. So how do I build my self-awareness, understand what works for me, right? Because you say preparing for competition, that's going to look different for each person. So how are we always encouraging people to go, hey, man, what kind of preparation is good for you? Are you the kind of player that hits a lot of balls when you're at your best? Or are you the kind of player that just has a short, sharp session? And when you're hitting a lot of balls, we know something is off. You only hit balls when you're out of form a lot. So is that your preparation? Are you the kind of player that likes to go out with your mates and relax once you've done your prep? Or are you the kind of player who's at home watching footage? And is that actually good for you? Because for some people it is. That's what they do at their best. For other people, when they're at their best, they're not doing that. And that's a sign that they're at their worst. And vice versa. So I'll be encouraging the conversation around, hey, mate, have you trial and error? Can you think about times when you were really successful? What were you doing? What did that preparation look like before you headed in? So I think that's a bigger conversation before we even talk about, preparing for this one competition. How do you prepare really well, period, for anything that it is you do? And if we can start to develop self-awareness, what we can do is develop self-regulation. So we got self-awareness or self-regulation or self-management. Okay, now we're starting to work toward those two. The next thing we're going to do now, if we can start that conversation, is go, all right, now we go into situational awareness. So where are we going? And this is where the coach will do a lot of work or help people prepare. We're going to India. The wickets are going to be spinning a lot more. They might be a little bit lower. They're going to be a little bit slower. Okay, so that's situational awareness and preparing for what you're going to encounter. Hey, it's going to be super hot. You need to stay hydrated. So now we got situational awareness. I've got self-awareness. And now I can pull my self-management based on the situation that we're preparing for. Does that make sense? And it's, going through that process with players is really important to not to spell it out for them. Hey, mate, different ways to prepare. What works for you really well? And here's what we're actually preparing for. Now, how do you tailor your stuff to this particular environment?
That's great, Peter. I did a bit of a straw poll of our audience tonight, and 80-90% of our coaches are community coaches or representative level coaches, and the over half of our attendees tonight coach junior cricket. So we're talking under 13s and below. So is there any shift in how we might manage certainly those conversations or the training environment, just to prepare our kids better for what's going to happen on game day?
Yeah, for sure. That's going to be different depending on your level. I can't imagine we'll be preparing or watching film for under 12s game. And obviously, the higher up you go, you're going to do that. And even in club cricket, like, people have different ways of going about it. At our club, we've been lucky enough to be successful for a long time, long before I was involved. And it's a very laid back. You don't really talk about the opposition much. Let's just deal with what we get on the day, focus on your own skills. Another successful club might do something different. So even within the same level, there's going to be different approaches. What I would suggest is you perform what you call a needs analysis. So look at your group and think, what does this group need? What's success for this group in this period of time? If you got under 12s and success is just building good relationships and enjoying the game of cricket, well, then that's your goal and your focus. And the same thing when you go to the competition. If your goal, again, at a higher level is preparing people for the, pathway players to go to maybe a professional environment, okay, well, then that's what's going to drive your sessions and drive the way you approach competition. What I would suggest, though, is really important for us as coaches is be consistent. I can't be the Mr. Relaxed, laid back dude, And then as soon as we go to a competition, now all of a sudden, I change my demeanor and my behavior. That's going to cause uncertainty, breeds anxiety in human beings. Well, just in animals the same way. So what we know is if I'm one way before competition and then I'm another way during competition, that's an issue. And that's going to breed anxiety amongst my players. That's going to rock their confidence. Versus if I can be really consistent, if I'm the coach that drives high standards all the time, but then I drive them at training and I drive them in the competition, everyone knows that's consistent. Like Craig Bellamy in rugby league, he goes off, but he always goes off apparently, and he's got the senior players they don't overreact to that because that's just Craig. Versus if he was real calm at training and did that at games, that would cause some anxiety. So how do you remain consistent in your approach? Don't be the kind of coach who, and we're all guilty of going up and down with losses, but let's say now all of a sudden I'm on the line. We're playing games. I'm being judged as the coach as well. I might have aspirations of coaching at a higher level, and it's a stepping stone. So if we lose the first game, do I start reacting differently and then treating my players differently? They will pick up on how you're feeling. We see this at pathway championships all the time. I'll see a team win a game, you know, and the coach is playing soccer with them after, and they're having fun, they're having a laugh, and then they lose the next game, and after the game they get sprayed. The coach wants nothing to do with them. So no, straight away, you've got anxious players because you're not consistent anymore. Now you're hanging on the wins and losses. So that's the kind of stuff that I would suggest. Like when you're preparing for competition, make sure you are consistent with how you go about things. If you keep that clear, your players will stay calm if you stay consistent. So I think that's an important thing for us to have a think about. Can't remember your question now, mate, but I hope it answered it.
Peter, that was fantastic. Look, if I can summarise, or maybe go on a slightly different tangent around the same topic, but summarising what you said, be consistent as coaches, particularly in the junior space. You mentioned about the wins and losses are not that important. It's about actually developing players over a journey. So understanding what you need, what your players need for them to get better, and set up some training environments that will achieve that over time. It's not going to happen at one training session. Is that pretty close?
Yeah, man, that's really good. And to your point about prepping for competition, specifically to that question is, whatever you can do in your environment, let's say you feel there's going to be an elevated level of scrutiny, or you feel there's going to be different wickets, or you feel there's different, you know, you're going to be playing under fatigue because you're playing multiple games. As you lead into the competition, just try and put those things into your training, right? If you know you're going to go and play on a ground that doesn't bounce, and you got Synthol nets like most of us do at cricket clubs, particularly in Queensland, we don't have a lot of turf nets like they do in Sydney and Melbourne. So let's say you're playing on a wicket that's not going to bounce. There's no point us whipping out the turf brand newies at training on Wednesday to bowl on Synthol. How about we get a bunch of old balls that don't bounce, and that's what we're bowling with. Bowlers get accustomed. That's what you're bowling with on the weekend. Batters, same thing. Or if we know we're going to play back-to-back T20 games in a tournament you're going to, and that's going to be, you know, taxing on the mind. All right, we're going to start training. Then we're going to go run 25 hill sprints, do some push-ups, and then come back and train again. That's game one. That's game two. So how do you just see what are we actually preparing for? That situational awareness I said before, and create those environments before you go to try and get the players acclimatized. So you're not telling them individually, hey, so you do it, you do it, you do it. You create the environment that they're likely to go into, and then facilitate the conversation. Say, guys, have a think about how you're going to do it, and here's the test run.
Fantastic. We're not even a third of the way through here. This is awesome. The next most popular piece of feedback we got, and this is all interrelated, I'm sure. More individualized. This is more individualized than team orientated, but concentrating and staying focused was the theme. So concentrating and staying focused. But some of the key words were routines, ball by ball, stay in the moment, and you mentioned it previously about consistency, trying to build consistency. So again, routines, ball by ball, stay in the moment, and consistency around how can we stay focused.
Yeah, I mean those are all the right words and things to be saying. What I would be suggesting is for each person, you know, you just facilitate the conversation, even if you're asking it in a group. What are the things that distract you generally? You know, so if we're talking about concentration, so at your best, you're able to concentrate. Nothing's on your mind. Oh, sorry, not nothing's on your mind. The things on your mind are the things you should be focusing on. You're looking at the field between balls. You're paying attention to the game situation. But when the ball's coming down, you're clear in your mind when you're batting, or at the top of your mark, you're clear with your ball. Okay, that's when we're focusing really well. So asking the questions, what causes you to not focus so well? You know, is it, oh, geez, I don't focus well when I'm bored. Okay, then that's something you can look into for you individually. Oh, I don't focus well when there's pressure, you know, the game situation. All of a sudden I start thinking about the result. Or I don't focus well when I got stuff going on off the field. My girlfriend broke up with me. That's when I'm not, okay. So it's just opening the conversation of what generally is the distraction. Is it arousal control or emotional regulation? Is it not having a clear plan? Is it just not understanding the game? Like sometimes we think, oh, the person's not concentrating, you know, because they're being lazy or they're feeling pressure. Maybe they just don't understand the game well enough. You know, is it the person who is concentrating so hard every single ball and between balls that all of a sudden after 20 minutes they're cooked? Or maybe they were playing the game the night before. You know, all through the night before they were thinking about it, and then we only got a certain amount of cognitive energy, right? So again, it's multifaceted, and what you want to do is open the conversation and ask people, well, when you're concentrating at your best, what does that look like? What are you thinking about? And they probably don't know. And they probably have no idea, particularly younger players, right? They don't know. We only look for stuff when things are going wrong. So when things are going right, what do you do? Asking some of those questions, and then starting to, as people said in there, build your routine based on that. So just very quickly to the point of routines on how they work, is our brains, what they look for is they feel calm when they can predict outcomes or what's going to happen, right? Uncertainty breeds anxiety. When if we don't know what's going to happen, we want to figure it out very quickly. And if you take that straight back to a survival or evolutionary perspective, there was danger all around you, and you could only relax when you dealt with that danger, right? So what our brains are searching for is, if I know how something's going to work out, if it feels it has a level of control, you can feel calm, you can focus on the thing in front of you. When there's a threat, your brain's going to focus on the threat, because that's what we're hardwired to do. Like, just imagine for cave people, if there was a lion, in front of you, and it's gonna eat you, or some kind of dangerous animal, and what you're thinking about at that point in time is how to make your wife happy, your cave wife happy, or your cave husband, then you're dead. The only thing you need to pay attention to there is the lion, right? So that's how our brains are hardwired. So now we go on a cricket field, and the ball's the thing we should be paying attention to. But if there's a threat to my spot in the team, my brain has a default to go think about that threat. If I don't score runs today, I'll get dropped. So that's the default for the brain, right? To start thinking about what is perceived as a threat, and now I'm not watching the ball. So yeah, the long story short there is, our brains are hardwired to detect threats, and when there's a threat, there's uncertainty, and it wants certainty. So what a routine does is it brings certainty to what you're going to do. Okay, before the ball comes, here's what I do. Again, coming back to behavior. Between balls, here's what I do. And you're pairing something physical with a mental process. And I don't know who's heard it before, like Lloydie presents it quite a lot. It's a framework we use at Cricket Australia, that in a routine, you're looking to reflect on what's gone before, then you're looking to relax, and then you refocus. So you're always in that cycle. Reflect, relax, refocus. So when you're talking to your players about their routines, again, what goes off for you when you're not in a good routine, or when you're not thinking clearly? What works when you do? Now, how do we pair the stuff that works when you do with your physical processing out in the middle? Because if your brain knows, okay, when the ball's going to bowl, here's what I do. When between balls, here's what I do. After a mistake, here's what I do. If you can train that process, you'll feel a lot more calm, because it knows, hey, now the ball's about to come. This is the thing I need to focus on. But you got to train it to do that.
Fantastic, Peter. I was just thinking back to my days with coaching some, junior club land. Would our 12, 13 boys and girls have the skills to understand that there's so much cognitive energy? You wouldn't use that phrase, obviously, but you've only got so much concentration time, so we actually have to use it wisely. Do kids have that capability to understand the process of sort of concentrating up, switching down, concentrating up?
Yeah, I think they do. You just have to term it appropriately. Generally, they might not be able to concentrate as long. I find it difficult to concentrate for a long period of time. Most of us do. And we're not going to hold their attention as long, because they don't have the necessary discipline or self-regulation to, when you do start to feel bored, to be able to switch back in. But they do get the concept. A really cool way I've heard it explained, and heard a few different ways, but the water tank analogy is one that a few people use to describe, cognitive depletion. So let's say you start the beginning of a day with a water tank, and the water tank is full, right? And if I turn that water tank on to full blast, then very quickly all the water's gone. So that water's going to last me the whole day. But if I turn it to full blast and I'm focusing so hard the whole time, then by the time I get halfway through the day, my concentration is gone. I've only got so much cognitive stores. So what we will need to learn to do, and you can explain it to people, is there's sometimes when you need to tap all the way on, right? So top of your mark, about to bowl, tap all the way on. Or you're in your stance, you're about to face up, tap all the way on. But then as soon as you've done that, so you've bowled your ball, you can now turn that to a slow drip. Once the ball is finished, you can turn that to a slow drip. I just said reflect, relax, refocus. So quickly, slow drip is you reflecting. Then when you relax, you turn it off, right? So you just reflect quickly. Yeah, hit my length. Field is right. I can see what the batter's doing. Now I switch it off. And you might be doing whatever, humming a song to yourself, counting to different things in the crowd, looking at your family, whatever it may be, you can switch off. Now the back top of your mark, now it's on full again. So it's that idea of a slow drip, turning it off and then turning it back on, but it only needs to be on full blast for a very short period of time. So ball to ball, let's say it is 45 seconds between each ball. The ball is only live for probably 2 seconds most of the time. Sometimes only a second, right? Maybe if you run a 2 or a 3, it might be live for 5 or 6 seconds. But in the 30-second break, it's usually only a couple of seconds. So if you're on for that whole time, you're cooked. So maybe that's a way to explain it to adults, but even to the kids, something that's easy for them to grasp. And then you probably just have to teach them more explicitly when the tap's on full blast, what you want them to be thinking about. Because that maybe won't come as naturally as it would for an older player.
That's a fantastic analogy, Peter. Got a really good question, and I think I'm going to throw it at you because I think it's related to this particular element. The questions come from the group. How important is fitness to the ability to concentrate?
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, we're all the disciplines that we whether it's physio and it's S&C or psychology, they're all connected, right? You're one person, and it's very important. So we talk about concentration. We know there's plenty of studies to suggest, and the dietitians will back it up. When you're dehydrated, your ability to concentrate starts to dip, right? So there's straight away there's a physical component. Our brains run almost completely off carbohydrates, right? In terms of as a fuel source, an energy source. So if we haven't fueled properly, we haven't eaten properly, there's no carbs in your brain, then your ability to function is inhibited, right? Now, this doesn't mean that as soon as you become dehydrated, you can't play. Of course not. It just means it starts to diminish. So those are things to pay attention to. Sleep is a massive one. We know that if we're not getting good quality sleep over a period of time, your cognitive functioning starts to decrease. Your ability to concentrate starts to decrease. So, and then to your point, fitness. So the same thing. If I haven't trained my body to be fit, so I get dehydrated quicker or I'm running out of fuel quicker, then yeah, my brain will start to suffer because my brain is just another organism that's a part of my body. So your fitness definitely plays a part. And to the point of, mental fitness that you hear some people talking about, that's also a piece. So if I never train, if I only ever train batting, for example, or bowling for 2 minutes at a time, or I'm bowling for 20 minutes and then that's it, then how do I go bowling over 6 hours during the day? Or not having bowl for an hour, then come back and bowl a second spell. So how do I actually train my mind? And again, that's dependent on your level, but training the body, training the mind, everything is all connected. So that's a great question. I'd say 100% physical fitness is connected.
Fantastic, Peter. And alongside physical attributes, it's about looking after yourself, eating well prior, hydrating during games. So thank you for that. You mentioned we're going to go on to the next element, and you have mentioned this. But what I'd like you to do is probably we have a lot of new coaches on the call. I'm suggesting junior coaches. So we're going to talk about arousal control. Okay, so you mentioned arousal control earlier, and some of the key words that sort of fit into this compartment that we had from the feedback was anxiety, breathing, relax, control emotions. So can you give the audience an understanding of what arousal control is, and then I'm sure words like anxiety and breathing and relax will naturally flow from that.
Yeah, it's a good question. Arousal control, emotion regulation, very important things. I think firstly, what's really important to set aside is goal. There's 3 things we can do as human beings, right? And this comes from cognitive behavioral therapy or any of those base models. Is you can think, you can feel, or you have emotions, and then you can behave or act, right? Those 3 things are always happening. Of your thoughts, emotions, and then behaviors, there's only one thing that you can fully control, and that's your behaviors, right? And that's a really important distinction to draw, because sometimes your thoughts are going to be a little bit off, and that's okay, and that's natural. The thought that you could control your thoughts completely, and I'm talking about complete control. If I want to raise my left hand 100 times out of 100, I can do that. That's complete control. If you think you can control your thoughts like that, you're on a hide into nothing, because no one can. It's the old simple adage of if we say You know, everybody close your eyes, and no matter what you do not think about a pink elephant. You're gonna think about a pink elephant, because if you know what an elephant looks like and someone primes the word, your brain will think about it. You can't control that, and it's a waste of time to try and battle that. Same with emotions, right? We don't have complete control of our emotions, because if we did, we'd never feel negative emotions. No one chooses to feel negative emotions. And negative emotions do have a function. So let's say you lose something that you love. It's a person or it's your job. You'll feel a sense of loss, or you feel sadness, you know, a sense of grief. Can't stop that. If you have feelings and you lose something you care about, you'll feel a sense of loss or sadness or grief. That's a natural part of it. So I can't completely control my thoughts. I can't completely control my emotions. What I can always do is control my behaviors. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up when you ask about arousal control is we're not expecting people to never get nervous. That's a clear distinction we need to make. We're not telling you, no, you can learn to never get nervous, or you can learn to never have self-doubt, or you can learn to never have a negative thought. That is impossible, at least as far as I know and all the research demonstrates. That's not our end goal. Our end goal is to be able to understand, again, we talked about self-awareness, understand your thoughts and emotions, and how do I regulate those a little bit? Through my behaviors. Because if I regulate them through my behaviors, I've got a better chance of influencing them and having some measure of control. But the thing I want to stick to is I need to control my behaviors to get to that. So if we hone in a little more on arousal control, you know, a lot of people would have heard of the inverted U, which is like, you know, there's a scale and there's a level of arousal where you're under aroused. Like imagine if you've just been walking out of bed and you had to play a cricket game, you'd be a bit too flat. And then there's a level being over aroused where you're too nervous, you're scattered, you can't think clearly, you're too amped up. And there's a happy medium somewhere in the middle. And it's about understanding for yourself, what does that happy medium look like for you? That's a really important distinction. Again, we don't want to get too caught up doing thinking like some days you will feel a little bit off your best. You might feel a little bit under aroused. But what are my routines and my behaviors that allow me to perform consistently? And other days you will feel a bit more over aroused. What are the small things I can do to just regulate that a little bit? Not to stop it completely, regulate it to a point where I can function. So someone mentioned earlier, breathing, you said, fantastic. It's one thing you can do physiologically to regulate your arousal state. If I'm over aroused and I slow my breathing down and I breathe from my diaphragm, I can actually regulate how I'm feeling. I can slow my heart rate. It's one of the one things that you can do on a quick and dirty level, or you can do meditative breathing for 20 minutes. That's one of the quick go-to. So asking people to become aware of their breathing and then learn to regulate that breathing response. That can usually get people to a state where you can calm. It's not an easy thing to do, and it needs to be trained. But yeah, the whole idea of arousal control is just educating young players that, hey, understand yourself and learn how do you perform at your best. You might be a player who performs at your best when you're a little bit anxious. That's when you got the right energy. Or you might be a player that likes to play really calm. You know, some people like to play with an edge. Not everyone's the same. You know, Virat Kohli, we're watching Kohli, he's playing with an edge. His level of arousal demonstrably is a lot higher than other people. You know, somebody like Steve Waugh, even like Iceman, that's how we knew him, right? That's the behavior that we see. So there's no right and wrong. It's just understanding what that looks like for you and learn a few little quick skills to make sure that you, again, you can't absolutely control them, but how do I just regulate my arousal a little bit? That's an important skill to learn.
Pete, that's awesome. And again, for our junior coaches, look, anxiety came up a lot, and I think in the feedback that you gave us, and I think you know, it'll be challenging coaching this year, and there's all sorts of social impediments that are affecting anxiety as well. But breathing for our younger players, teaching them to breathe properly is really important. And I'm going to touch on that at the end of this webinar around the Above the Shoulders app that Cricket Australia have. So we'll sort of touch on some of these skills or some of these opportunities to improve as we get towards the end of the webinar. Goal setting. Goal setting came up. Not as often as I thought it would. And I must say that we work with our talented pathway athletes, and we've made some assumptions around goal setting, Peter, where we felt that this was a natural part of kids' education. But goal setting is something that's a skill that our kids they're not aware of. They haven't been exposed to. So would you like to touch on goal setting again? Some of the key words that came out of the goal setting element: perfectionism, growth mindset, dealing with setbacks, teaching the love of the game while expecting high performance outcomes. That was some very pointed feedback there. So perfectionism, growth mindset. Growth mindset obviously is a very buzz phrase at the moment. So I'll get you to touch on that as well. And dealing with setbacks. So goal setting.
Yeah. Goal setting is obviously it's a key kind of performance or psychological skill or mental skill for sure. I think we got to be really smart with how we approach it with people. So yeah, there's ways to teach it. I'm sure everybody's heard these SMART goals, being specific, measurable, actionable, realistic, timely, whatever. And that's really important too from a structural standpoint. But I think what's equally as important is the education around what are useful, right? And how do we distinguish between things we can control and things that we can't control? And it doesn't mean that things that we can't control aren't aspirational. So let's think of Olympic athletes. Every Olympic athlete is dreaming of the gold medal. And that can be a really powerful and useful tool. Like when we talk about a big kind of long-term goal, what it can do is give you purpose, right? That's the reason why it's useful. If I set my goals well, or if I have it, that's something I want to achieve, that can give me purpose to get up. So most Olympic athletes, for example, aren't as lucky as cricketers, where, you can do cricket as a full-time job. A lot of Olympic sports, people go to work in the morning. People go train in the morning, they go to work, they come train in the evening, and they don't make a full-time career. These are elite athletes, best in what they do, but they train either side of a full-time job, for example. So why do they do it? Why do they get up in the morning at 5 a.m.? Not every day do they feel like doing that, for sure they don't. And not every evening, sometimes after work they'd be tired, but they get up and they go because it's purpose, right? It's like, my end goal is to be #1 in the world. My end goal is to make the Olympic Games. That's my end goal. And that's something that keeps driving them. What's actually equally as important in that process, though, is once I've set that goal, what are my values, right? Because the values are the things that help you make a decision when your emotions are going in a different direction. You can be consistent with your values. So let's say an athlete says, yeah, I want to be an Olympic gold medalist, but they also say to themselves, I'm the kind of person who never quits. That's a value of mine. Be determined, you never quit. So the days when I feel like quitting, my emotions are telling me to go left. My value tells me to go right so I can reach my end goal. I hope that makes sense. Those long-term goals, if set well, can align with your values, and you want it to be set based on your values, and it can help give you purpose. The thing is, sometimes with those is that they're very far away, and so your values are the stuff that help you day to day. And with short-term goals, or from a goal-setting perspective, something we need to educate people on is not every goal needs to be outcome-based. So I want to make the Olympics. I want to be #1. I want to score 500 runs. Because what we're doing is we're throwing a lot of energy into something that you can't control. No matter who you are, you cannot control your results completely, particularly in a sport where you're playing a team sport, right? I cannot completely control my results. It's impossible, because if both teams could, then both teams will win. It doesn't happen. Somebody's got to lose. No matter what you do, even if you play as well as you could, somebody's going to lose, right? Or as a batter, you could make perfect decisions, perfect execution, and one just nips off the seam, hits the edge. Or umpire gives you a bad decision. Or as a bowler, you bowl excellently, hit your line and left, people drop catches. Inside edges go for 4. So there's a real distinction here. I can't be setting my goals just based on outcomes or just based on results, because I can't control results. I can influence them, but what I can control is my behaviors, like we said before. So how do I set some goals around behaviors, right? I'm going to train this many times a week, or I'm going to do, this many laps, or I'm going to execute this ball this many times before I finish training, or I want to land this many balls in this spot. How do I get some process-driven goals, which are things I know I can control? And if I start to do that, get some process-driven goals that align to the outcomes, that's how we're helping people set goals. Not just the fact that they're smart or measurable and those kind of things. Are they process-oriented, and are they things we can actually control? That's something that's really useful. And then the other piece is allowing people to set goals in ways that work for them individually. Not everybody wants to write down goals. It's not everyone. Not every person uses a journal. I think it's a really cool tool. Not everyone likes to do it like that. Some people hold them in the back of their head, or they have a conversation with one person and that's it. That's how they're going to set their goals. That's a person they go back to. So I'm not trying to force them to do it a certain way, but we just want to educate them. You can use a long-term goal to give you purpose. You're going to use your values day to day to help you achieve that. But then even when you're setting some short-term goals, can you make sure you're setting some of those goals and they're process-oriented, the things you can control, the things you can do, and will live with the results. Even though the results are important, we can't completely control them. And that's a difficult thing to grasp or understand, but it's true.
Excellent, Peter. My takeouts from that, process goals versus outcome goals are very important. Also, not everyone sets goals, so everyone's different. And as coaches, we need to understand that all our players that we look after are different. How do we get to know that? We need to connect with our players so we know who they are and know what their motivations are, and then work with them to maybe set some goals in the way that they're comfortable in setting. So that's the takeouts that I had from that. We're actually going to step into our last segment, which we had a little bit of this, not as much as I thought, but it's probably based on the type of coaches that have joined us tonight. But mental imagery, words such as visualization, thinking, do, not don't. I think you touched on that a bit earlier about how we process our thoughts, but sort of visualization. And I know there's some level 3 coaches, level 2 coaches who are working in Premier grade cricket, certainly pathway cricket, where this element could be quite useful, a useful tool for our players. So can you touch on that for us, please?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing with imagery, mental imagery, or I hear it called mental rehearsal. I do some work with the Queensland Police Service, their special emergency response team, but they call it mental rehearsal. They're talking about imagery. I hear some people say visualization. We're talking about imagery. We're often talking about the same thing, but we don't have a consistent language, and that's okay. So just be able to look out for the different ones, and you understand what people are talking about. What we really are saying is, how do we prepare mentally for a situation when we're not in it, right? And that's what we're doing all the time. So I think it's educating people to go, hey, we all use this skill all the time. So like Lloydie's giving some conversations about some of the elite Aussie players, and they'll say, "No, I don't use imagery," and then he's like, "Man, I see you walking through the hotel shadow shotting all the time." That's imagery. That's you rehearsing something before you get there. The same thing when we're at training. What we're trying to do is create an environment, and prep for the game, whether or not it's like, hey, mate, we're going to face 2 left-arm spinners. Can you come balls on left-arm spin at me, right? And you then face that skill. But then when the ball is not there bowling, you might be shadow shotting. You might be doing drill work, preparing for a left-arm spinner. That's imagery. It doesn't have to be you sitting down in the room meditating. I think by people thinking that that's what it is, it turns some of us off from it, right? I'm a very pragmatic guy. Anything that sounds airy-fairy, it misses me, right? I have to then double check to go and dive into that. And a lot of players are like that. Some people will love it. Some people love the philosophical, trying different things. And some people just want straight pragmatic stuff. So it's just educating people, hey, we all do imagery. Just get a clear understanding of what it looks like for you. And is it something that's, really useful? Is it something you can expand upon a bit more? Is it something you do with your batting but not your bowling? Is it something you can pull into your fielding? Are you the kind of person who likes to do it alone in the room? Or are you the kind of person who likes to get out there on the pitch in the morning before you play and go through some stuff? Do you want to just talk through a situation with your coach? Hey, mate, what happens in this scenario? So contingency planning is imagery. Like, visualizing what it's going to be like on this. Okay, I give you this field. What are you going to do? Problem solving. The person's thinking about it. They're visualizing it, right? They're probably getting a sense internally as well. Okay, that's imagery. So yeah, educating people on, no, we all do it already. So can we refine that process and use it in a better way for ourselves? Is it something we can improve, or even just label it and understand that you have it? It's a really important tool, because what we're trying to do is rehearse mentally before we get there. The last thing I'd say on imagery is, what you can do with images, you can incorporate different responses. So it's not just what you see, right? We've got the ability as human beings, when we press ourselves into the future, like for example, anxiety, when we're thinking about something coming up, job interview, or, asking out someone you like, or having a difficult conversation, we feel a level of anxiety right in that moment. So the thing hasn't happened yet, but while you're looking forward, You feel the anxiety now. So we can do the same thing from a cricket context. So, hey, man, the game is next week, the grand final. But I might be feeling nervous about it now. So how could I prepare for those? I've got a perfect opportunity. Hey, man, every time I think about that final, I get nervous. All right, man, I want you to think about the final. Pretend we're batting there now. With 9 down, you working with a fast ball on his batting. With 9 down, we got 3 overs to face. You get out, we lose the premiership. Right? You hang in, we win. And I'm like, whoa, it's this big thing. But hey, how can we train for it? I put him in that situation. And maybe it's a punishment, or you do it with high catches. It's like, hey, 1 wicket to win, 1 run to win. High ball goes up. You drop it, we're all doing 45 hill sprints. You catch it, we win. Because what it does immediately is it throws them into that level of anxiety, and they can prepare for, okay, shit, in a game when I'm in this position, how am I going to handle it? So practicing that, whether it's physical practice or then them thinking about that situation and how they're going to manage it, that's that mental rehearsal and mental imagery that can be really useful. Not just what I see, but what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling. Shit, I got a chance to prepare for that. Now I can think about that again on what I do the next time. So hopefully that makes sense about how we can close that gap and use imagery to help yourself prepare.
Pete, I think that was an awesome analogy because you're right. Our kids do get stressed about what may happen, and if we can actually incorporate that into our training, we are hopefully better preparing them, particularly if we incorporate some breathing and some control mechanisms at training at the same time, which can hopefully teach them that they get a good result. We've got another question. This is a tricky one, so get ready for this. It's from Anonymous. How do you manage teams where some players are motivated and goal orientated, but some are not? So some of your players are, they have really distinctive goals. Do you just focus on the individuals who are receptive, or should you try to bring the team along?
Gee, that's a great question indeed. What I would say is there's no one set answer there. So that's easier to work with. If, for example, you say, okay, I got a bunch of people that are really motivated by performance, right? Or they're trying to play at the next level. We get this in grade cricket often. Got people that want to push to the next level, particularly in those top couple of grades. Then you have a few people who are just there, they're talented and they're just playing with their mates. You have a few people who just want to win at club cricket. That's the reason they're playing. They love the club. They fucking want to win for the club. Okay, so we got these different ones, but they all have clear motivators. And so if they do, then it's just about you tapping into each of those motivators for those groups of people or those individuals and going, how do they all align? Because the best way for you to get, selected, if that's somebody's goal, hey, mate, they're not only looking at you from a performance perspective, they're looking at you from being a great teammate. Mm-hmm. So you can say, hey, mate, if they're going on a line and spraying their teammates and it's all about them, you say, hey, mate, people are watching that too. So how do you actually become a great teammate to go with your performances? Or if it's the guy who just wants to win at club cricket and he's pissed off because the first class players don't kind of train enough, and he's saying that, blow, hey, man, these guys are training outside that, and them at their best are going to help us win. So even if everything doesn't go your way, I know you want to win. So I know you're going to rip in, you're going to do the club stuff. They're going to help us win, and we're going to move together on this line. Or you get the people who just want to play for fun. Tell you what, it's a lot more fun winning than losing, and it's a lot more. Can you create an environment of your training that is fun? High stakes, bit of competition, but also high camaraderie. And again, how you react to when you win or lose, that's important. If you lose and then you start carrying on and blowing up at these guys, and then you lose the guys who are just there for fun. Or not just for fun, but who are there for fun and enjoying with their mates. They want connection. They want consistency. Okay, so make sure you don't lose them. So how can you understand what motivates each group and try and align those? Now, sometimes that's easy, with shared team values, or sometimes that's difficult. What is, though, to the point I think maybe the person was getting at is sometimes you get a person that's just a shit person. And if they're being a shit person, seriously, they just have poor behaviors, they're negative and they're drawn in the group. I would give those kind of people, if you got the option, to give that person an ultimatum of, hey, man, these are some behaviors that are completely unacceptable. And if you do them, you're not going to be a part of the team. It's that simple. And again, maybe you're not always in a position to do that. You might be coaching an international team and your best player is an absolute tosspot. So, you're going to have to try and manage around that, and it's difficult to do. Maybe you're helping your players live with that person. But if you do have the option to set some really hard line behaviors, that some things are unacceptable. Rocking up to a training session drunk, for example. Punching a teammate in the face. There's some stuff, if you do that, mate, you're gone. So you don't tolerate, idiots. You might have someone who's a bit difficult to deal with. Make sure they're doing their job and they're doing all the things that are non-negotiables. And then the stuff that's not non-negotiable, don't fret about it. Like, if it's like this person isn't hanging out with all their teammates, they come, then they leave. Okay, cool. As long as they come to training when it's time to train, they train. So picking your battles with difficult people, but if they cross the line that you think is unacceptable, being able to hold your ground around that. I know it's not always easy to do that, but that's the best case scenario.
Pete, you've touched on a lot of themes tonight, and those that have joined us for other webinars, we've focused along a very strong theme around the 4 C's. So those coaches will understand, the C's around connection and character and competence and confidence, etc. So it's fantastic. We have just look at one more question. Again, anonymous. I think it's a different anonymous. Some players I coach look great in the nets, but are nervous when in the actual game. And this is my consistent observation about them. How can I handle that? How can the coach handle that? Or what that coach means, asking this question, is how can I help my players get better out on the field?
Yeah, that's a good question. If I just draw back to some of the stuff, they may have errors in the way that they're thinking about it, putting it in too big a proportion. But one thing that we look at in cricket is, I think of all the sports, everybody's got a difference between training and playing, right? I think of all the sports, we got the biggest disadvantage. Like, we train in nets, often not on turf, but even if you are training on turf, you're training in nets, there's this net down the side of your head. So what it becomes about is just technical skill in the nets, right? Or we got good net batters. But there's no field. And we know in the game, it's all about what's happening in the game. You're adapting to the conditions. You're checking different fields. You got different bowlers. There's a rhythm to the game. So if our training environment is, we know no matter what, it's going to be different. But if it's as different as it can be, we're not helping those people prepare. So what we're trying to do is go, how do I actually create an environment at training that provokes some of those same nerves that they get? So kind of what I was chatting about earlier. How do you create a rhythm of the game like that, right? Whether it's bowlers, you can't always do it because you need to get volume in. But you say, hey, this net, I know coaches do this. You're out. Or bowlers are going in overs, or you put something on it. How do I close the gap between what's happening here and what's happening out there? And even the rhythm of the game, like I said, 30 seconds between balls or 45 seconds between balls, that's more like a game pace. And then time off between overs and adjusting the stuff. In the nets, you got 4 balls at the top of the net. They bowl a ball, you pick it up, you throw it back to the next guy, you get in your stance, it's nothing like a game. So for those players who are getting nervous, how do you create an environment that's closer to a game and see if they start to get the same, hey mate, you're out. Or, what there's punishments on different things, whatever they may be. And to create a little bit of pressure, set a field for them. There's games like, I'm sure you guys call it something different, but a game called 21 where you set a field and every dot ball for a batter is 3 points to the bowler. And every run they score, they can only score singles. And you got to get to 21 first. So it takes away the net batter just thinking about middling the ball. He's got to hit the ball in the gaps and get the runs. And you'll see the players under pressure, because then when you get it wrong, there's something like, for us, when we do that, whatever the difference is, if the ball gets to 21 and you're on 3, you got to run 18 runs in a row. So there's something on it. So whatever you can do to kind of create an environment to see some of that pressure, and then you can have the conversation with the player to go, hey, mate, what I'm noticing is when we're doing game scenario, we got balls one at a time, I notice that you play one shot and you don't take a break at all. You're just playing a shot and you don't need twiddling your gloves, and then you look up again the next ball. How about you take some time in between the balls and relax a little bit? How about we work on your breathing? Between each ball, I want you to take 30 seconds. And then you can start to have a conversation about, when you're nervous, here's what I see. When you're playing well, here's what I see. Let's close that gap at training. And then the other piece would be, I spoke about thoughts and emotions that we have. What are the thoughts that they're having that are provoking these emotions? Are they going out to bat thinking, I have to make runs this game? Or are they going out to bat thinking, my dad's, I don't want to let down my parents, or I won't make this team? And then pulling those thoughts back to, oh, geez, there's some kind of animal outside making a lot of noise. I apologize. I think it sounds like a bullfrog.
It's a big elephant.
It probably is. But how do you start to maybe address some of those if they have thinking errors? address a little bit of that. So to go, hey, maybe you should focus on my first 10 balls. Here's what I'm looking to do, even if I feel a little bit nervous. So I'm going to use my breathing to bring on my nerves. But my first 10 balls, here's what I'm looking to do. Or when I'm at the top of them, this is my plan. I'm going to take my breathing and here's what I'm trying to do. So instead of thinking about my spot in the team or what's going to happen or win or lose in the game, how can you just start to push them in that next direction? But again, you need to start to create that at training. If your training environment is completely different to a game, well, it's going to be really hard for you to have coachable moments at training as they relate to a game. And then the only time you're doing it is in a game, which is once a week. Maybe you're batting once every 2 weeks or bowling once every 2 weeks. So I hope that makes sense about how you try and close that gap at training and then address the conversations about what you see. Can you guys hear that?
Peter, again. Oh, Pete, you're singing from our hymn sheet. Our effective coaching webinars focus on 4 C's, but they also talk about training environments, modified games, game scenarios, get out of the nets. You can actually still have purposeful training in the nets environment, but we want our kids out playing in games and learning about the game out there in that particular environment. Peter, it's been fantastic. We are going to wrap up. So before we say a few thank yous, I just want to reiterate to our coaches on the call around the Cricket Australia coaching app. In particular, if you do not have the app, go to the relevant store, download it. It is free. It's a fantastic resource, particularly for junior coaches. But there's an element of that particular app which is above the shoulders, which covers off on a lot of the stuff that Peter's spoken about. There's some videos in that particular part of the app that talk about distractions, breathing, having game plans, self-talk, reflection, emotion, nerves. So there's 8 or 9 videos around dealing with those particular elements of above the shoulders. So I can't emphasize enough how important that is for that you download that. Have a look at it. You might be able to employ some stuff at training that will allow your kids to get better at this stuff. Peter, absolute pleasure. Thank you very much. Really appreciate your time tonight. Your engaging way has been fantastic. For our audience, just to let you know that we are going to be sending out a follow-up email to everyone that registered. That email will contain a link to this recording, we hope. Pretty sure it will. It'll be a YouTube clip, so be aware of that. We're also looking for Peter to potentially provide us with some PowerPoint slides that cover off on some of the stuff that we've spoken tonight. And we'll also include some resources that might be helpful for your parents around the type of messaging that might be helpful for your parents with their kids, either coming home from a game or going to a game, or if they're not selected in teams. So we're going to try and arm you with as much information that we can that hopefully helps you. On that note, I've said enough. Peter, thanks again. If you'd like to say goodbye to the group, that would be fantastic. And Mark, I'll get you to close off when you're ready.
Yeah, I just said thanks for that, Brett. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Just to reiterate what I said at the start, by no means was there any gospel or some of those are my experiences and some things that are backed through the research or some principles. But by all means, make sense of things for yourself. There's plenty more to discuss. We could talk about this stuff for hours. And so to continue to do that, talk to each other, talk to your coaches, talk to your players. As long as you're learning and actively engaging in this process, you're gonna get better in this space. And the other piece I would say is, there was a question about about the nerves or helping your players. Remember where our role begins and ends. Like, we can't do it for players. They're gonna be players no matter what you do. They're gonna struggle with their nerves. They're gonna be players no matter what you do. Are gonna be hard-headed. All we can do is kind of create the best environment. Ask your right questions, be prepared, be organized, build your connections. But we can't be responsible for their results, nor should we be. We can't take their credit when they do well, nor should you take their blame when they do poorly. That's taking away, their accountability. They're the ones that make the decisions. When they score hundreds, it doesn't go against your name. But what we do need to be accountable for is making sure we're organized, we're prepared, all this stuff. We're learning you're being the best coach you can be, and that's where you start. But you'll facilitate as well as you can. And sometimes it won't manifest for that player, or it just might not manifest for them in your group. 10 years down the line might be when they go, hey, all that stuff that Mark was telling me about, it's just clicked for me. Because there's so many more variables in a player's life than just us or the 1 hour, 2 hours at training they spend with us. So yeah, just remember your job begins and ends. Do your best, but we're not gonna fix everybody. Not that people are there to be fixed. So just make sure that, yeah, you remember that where your job begins and ends. It's really important, I think.
Thanks, Peter. Last message from me. Coaches, enjoy Christmas. Have a great Christmas, everyone. But more importantly, try and enjoy your coaching. And we look forward to catching up with you on a webinar in 2021. Again, thanks, Peter. Thanks, Mark. And it's over and out from us.